Okay, Kate or Lisa, do you want to start the meeting for us?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the September 21st Sustainability Advisory Board meeting. And do you want me to start with the chair scripted agenda?
Yeah, let's start with the roll call and then we could do the other.
Thank you. All right, I would now can I call the meeting to order? I guess I have to do that. I'll now like to call the September 21st, 2022 Longmont Sustainability Advisory Board meeting to order. Could we please start with the roll call?
Yes, Mary Lynn.
Present.
Michelle Roth.
Present.
Charles Musgrave.
Present.
Ralph Grosswald.
Present.
And we do not have Kate Collardson, Jim Metcalf, or Robert Davidson with us for board members. Staff members, Lisa Knobloch.
Present.
Becky Doyle.
Present.
Francie Jaffe.
Here.
Debbie Seidman. Is here. Susan Bartlett.
Here.
Heather McIntyre is here, and we have Scott Hansen with us observing as well today. And Councilmember Martin.
Here.
Thank you. We have a couple of community members with us. I'll unmute you so you can introduce yourselves, and then we'll do the public invited to be heard later in the meeting. So Elsie, we'll start with you. Elsie, are you able to unmute? Maybe not. Kim?
Yes,
Oh,
I am able to unmute.
Okay.
Yes, what would you like to hear?
Just
about
your
me?
name.
Elsa Wilkins.
Great, thank you. And then if you want to speak later on, we'll get you permissions to do that at that time in the meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Kim.
Yes, it's Kim Edmondson.
Great, thank you. All right, we do have a quorum with 4 members. But since we don't have a chair, we need to elect one for this meeting. So
I would like to nominate Charles Musgrave as our chair pro tem for the duration of the meeting.
I'll second that. With his permission.
I don't know what that means, but okay.
You get an immediate raise in salary.
Awesome.
And I have to remind folks that I get a message saying unstable internet when I'm on video, so I may have to go dark unless I'm speaking. Otherwise, my screen will freeze up.
thanks, Mary. Charles, are you okay with that nomination?
Sure.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, Charles, I'll send you the script quick.
Email.
Yep.
Thanks, Mary.
You work at a university. I'm sure you have much more recent experience with Robert's Rules of Order than I do.
Oh, you'd be surprised. We should use it a lot more.
Yeah. When I was working for universities, we pretended we were using Robert's Rules of Order, and then we never did.
Okay, I just got the email. I will open the file. There it is. Okay. Slide here.
And we're at number 4, land acknowledgement.
All right. So I will read the land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge that Longmont sits on the traditional territory of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and other indigenous peoples. we honor the history and the living and spiritual connection that the first peoples have with this land. It is our commitment to face the injustices that happened when the land was taken and to educate our communities, ourselves, and our children to ensure that these injustices do not happen again. Okay, so next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from the last meeting. So does anyone have any changes or corrections that they have to suggest for amending the meeting notes from our last meeting? All right. Take that as a no. So if no one does anyone move to approve the minutes of our last advisory board meeting? We need someone to move. We either need to have someone suggest a change or someone to move that we approve the minutes as are from our last meeting.
I'll be happy to move to approve the minutes as stated.
Thanks, Ralph. Do we have a second?
I second it.
Thanks, Michelle. I guess call a vote then. So Heather, do I do that or is that you?
You do it.
I do it. Okay.
Yep.
Those who are in favor of approving the minutes from our last meeting, please say aye.
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 Aye. Those against? Okay. Let's see. Staff, do you have any agenda items or documents or sorry, agenda revisions or anything to bring up?
Nope, I don't believe so unless any other staff do.
Doesn't look like it. So I think we can move forward. Okay, so item 7 is general business. If board members would hold their comments and questions until the end for each presentation, after staff have finished their presentations. We have a presentation from the regional EV plan. Lisa's going to give us that. Ready, Lisa?
I'm ready. Thanks, Charles. Sorry, the light, it's like the light right behind me. It's kind of weird, but I'm trying to reconfigure myself. So first of all, I wanted to let folks know, because I know we mentioned last time that initially Platte River Power Authority was planning to come today to provide an update to you all. They had to reschedule sort of at the last minute. So they hopefully will be coming to our October meeting. Fingers crossed, I'm waiting to have them confirm that. So I just wanted to let you all know in case you all were waiting for that presentation. So we only have one thing on the agenda today, which is the Regional Transportation Electrification Plan, which I think I've mentioned to this group a couple of times that we've been participating in. And so the plan was recently complete. I believe I sent that link to you all in your packet if you had a chance to look at it. I just wanted to go through just the high level basics of it with you all, just so you're aware of what's in that plan and what our plan is as far as participation in the implementation of that moving forward. And Heather, I think it's in presentation mode. I don't know that that really matters, but just FYI.
That's weird because I told it to do the screen that is the presentation itself. Give me 1 second. Try that again. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Great. All right, you can move to the next slide, please. All right, so this was an effort that was pulled together starting mid last year with Boulder County, folks from Louisville, and the Xcel Energy Partners and Energy Program as an effort to put together regional planning guides specifically around transportation electrification, since we all have a lot of the same goals and transportation is a regional issue, so that we can look at large scale and equitable solutions to our region and develop a common vision and strategies. We came in a little bit late to that. Xcel Energy is also offering local community EV plans. We already have our transportation roadmap, and as we fall outside of Xcel's electric territory, we aren't eligible for that, but being a Boulder County community, it was beneficial for us to participate in this process since there's a lot of alignment with our EV goals as well. Next slide. This is stuff that you all are familiar with, but looking at just regional planning for electric vehicles. So obviously we all don't necessarily live and work and stay within our own communities. We move across the communities on the Front Range and beyond. And so it's important for us to take a regional look at vehicle electrification and also understanding the role that transportation plays in our greenhouse gas emissions. So for the county, it's 1/3 of our emissions. In Longmont, it's about 20% of our emissions. Regionally, it's a very significant impact to our emissions and obviously also to air quality. And this is an opportunity for us to leverage impact and also position us for federal and state funding that's coming down specifically focused on vehicle electrification. Next slide. These are just benefits of transportation electrification, which I know you all are familiar with, but public health, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, energy independence and cost stability, and then saving money over time with the benefits of EVs. Next slide. So there's efforts on the federal, state, and local level. Again, this is an effort to kind of streamline and align all of our goals. So if you all are not familiar, the state does have a Colorado electric vehicle plan that was put out in 2020. This effort aligns with the state's goals. On that, I will say that Boulder County as a whole has, I believe, surpassed both the EV charging infrastructure and vehicle registrations that the state's goals had set out. So Boulder County as a whole is pretty far along. However, when you start to look at that distribution across the county, that is not equitably distributed. And so part of the effort of this plan is to look at equitable distribution of both charging infrastructure and access to EVs as well. Next slide. And Heather, I don't know if you saw this, it looks like there's somebody in the waiting room.
I am letting him in, but his connection must not be very good.
Oh,
It
okay.
shows that he's joining.
Oh, okay, gotcha. You can go to the next slide. So this is just an overview of the timeline. So the plan development happened beginning July 2021 and was concluded in July 2022. The next phase of that through the Partners in Energy program is an 18-month implementation phase. So that kicked off in August and will go through December of 2023. And then it'll really be incumbent upon the partner communities to decide what continued implementation looks like. Next slide. These are all the partner communities that participated in this process. Next slide. And you can bump to the next slide. So this is the vision that was developed in this process. So Boulder County communities will work with regional partners to implement solutions that support large scale and equitable transition to zero emission vehicles. Next slide. These are all the components of the plan. So if you had a chance to look at it, this is what you see in there. One of the things that I want to call out that I think is interesting and helpful in regards to this is it is a regional plan, but when you look at the how do we get there, the strategies and implementation details, it details what's the role of the region as a regional team and what are the roles of local partners. So obviously there are some things that make sense to do and to plan and to coordinate on a regional scale. And then there's a lot of components that are really going to be dependent on local communities to do, and especially to help with community engagement and outreach and messaging, and then a lot of the details, particularly again as we fall into the PRPA territory around things like grid analyses and understanding what areas of our community can support EV load and where we might need to do some additional infrastructure. Next slide. The two goals that were set out through this plan is transitioning 30% of vehicles registered in Boulder County. Oops, sorry, my camera. Here we go. To zero emissions by 2030. Again, that aligns both with the state goal as well as our Go EV resolution that council passed last year. Other communities have similar Go EV resolutions. Just to put that in context, this obviously is referring to the county, and I don't have that data at the tip of my tongue, but for Longmont, our current EV registrations is about 2.4%. So we have quite a long way to go between now and 2030 to get to that 30%, although there's a lot happening in a lot of different areas to help make that happen. And then by 2030, install combined 2,380 public level 2 and DC fast charging stations, again, equitably distributed across the Boulder County. So right now, if you look at a map, there is quite a bit of infrastructure already in place, but it is pretty concentrated in the Boulder area. Next slide. So develop the two goals, 4 focus areas, which I'll talk about in a minute, 3 cross-cutting themes, and then 15 priority strategies that we're looking to implement in the next 2 years. And then it also identifies some longer term strategies as well. Next slide. So these are the 4 focus areas. So community EV adoption, public charging, home and work charging, and plans, codes, and policies, and then equity, financing, and collaboration are the 3 cross-cutting themes that we want to make sure are incorporated into each of these areas. Next slide. So in the community EV adoption area, you can see the near-term strategies that are listed there, focusing on regional community outreach. So that's something that we know is a big need and a big barriers. There are a lot of myths and misconceptions about EVs out there. The state is actually rolling out a communications toolkit and messaging campaign that's supposed to be starting, I think, sometime in October. So we're hoping to capitalize on the efforts of the state and just adapt that messaging for our local communities. Residential EV purchasing incentives, equitable EV car share program, looking at workforce development, and then also dealership outreach, and not just the main, like Nissan dealers and whatnot, but also private dealers that serve more of the used car market. So making sure that, especially if we want to get information to folks that might not be in the market for a new car, but they're also getting information and access to rebates and incentives and things like that. Home and work charging, focusing on multifamily charging outreach, equitable multifamily charging incentives, and single family home charging incentives as well. Next slide. Public charging, that is looking at really that planning component. So the first strategy that we're looking at, and hopefully this will be done in the next couple of months, is mapping public charging locations alongside a number of different factors, like where are multifamily sites, where are publicly owned sites, where are key corridors that we might want to focus on, where other potential land uses that we know are beneficial to install charging, obviously what's currently available, demographic information, utilizing things like our climate risk and vulnerability mapping information to identify other community amenities and social demographics as well that might be useful in helping us identify where we want to locate charging across the region. And this is really a big step in also looking at the funding components that are coming down, or funding opportunities that are coming down. So as a region, we can say we have a regional plan for where we want charging infrastructure to go. So this will be a big component. Looking at where to site DC fast charging, mobility hubs. So where could there be central opportunities that look at all forms of transportation not just privately owned EVs, and then also shared mobility and delivery fleets, and how can we potentially partner and co-locate charging infrastructure with folks that have mobility and delivery fleets that need access to charging. And then a focus on plans, codes, and policies. So what there are not currently, at least that we've been able to find, design standards for EV charging infrastructure. So things like ADA accessibility, setbacks, signage, all of that kind of stuff. So we're hoping to create that as a region so that all of our municipalities can utilize that, and again, create some consistency across the region, and making sure that we are aligned with, you know, signage that's enforceable, having some consistent pricing structures, making sure that EV charging is accessible to everybody, all of those sorts of things. Next slide. You can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, the next 18 months are focused on implementation. We have, we'll have quarterly full team meetings, monthly subgroup meetings in each of these areas, and then monthly project management teams as well. And so we just started that process. So there's a handful of Longmont staff that are participating in the monthly subgroup meetings in those 4 areas that I just mentioned. So we have things that are underway that we've already been looking at in terms of where to site charging. We've been talking a lot about the mapping component. So as I think you all know, we did apply for a DOE grant. I guess that was last year. I think it was last year. Yeah. I know, Charles, you helped us review that. That was based on our transportation roadmap, but a lot of that was looking at mapping and how do we site EV infrastructure for, again, accessibility and equity. How do we focus on those education and accessibility pieces, equity-based incentives, all of that kind of stuff. And so we had a lot of strategies that came out of that process, even though we didn't get that grant. This work aligns a lot with the priorities that came out of our transportation roadmap. And so it really is beneficial for us to align with this regional effort. And again, hopefully leverage the funding that's coming down. So our neighboring communities, we're not competing against them for the same funding, but we're also working together to meet similar goals. Next slide. So that's pretty much it. So Partners in Energy is really continuing to manage this process. They bring a lot of technical expertise to the table. They'll help with joint marketing and outreach. And then also tracking and reporting towards meeting those goals. And Longmont's just going to stay participating in this process. So as we get to different pieces of implementation, I will bring anything relevant back to this group, and I'll keep you all in the loop as that moves forward. And then obviously, as there's other decision-making components, we'll be taking those items to council as well. All right, I think that's it. Any questions or comments on that? Mostly that was just informative to give you all a deeper level of information, since I know I've been mentioning that for a handful of months.
Thank you, Lisa. That was fantastic. Any questions for Lisa?
I think I saw Ralph. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Couple of questions, Lisa. First of all, of course, as a new board member, I'd be interested to know what the role of our board would be and how we can help and participate. And I had a couple of, informational questions that you may not have the answers to, and I won't waste a lot of time, but I was curious whether or not anybody's addressing what happens to the automobiles that are gas-powered combustion automobiles in this transition. Is that being integrated into it? And the second question is, where will this power come from? We assume we want it to be non-carbon. And again, if this is getting into the weeds, it's fine. I did take time to look through the document, and I'm sure a lot of that information is probably somewhere, but if you know the answer to those, but most importantly, how can our board help? But what about these other issues? I was just curious if you knew the answers.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ralph. Those are great questions. So first and foremost, how can this board help? So continue to support the efforts that you all have been. So you reviewed and supported the transportation roadmap that laid out a number of these strategies that then we took to City Council. As we move forward, and there's additional decisions to be made potentially around program development, incentives, any of that kind of stuff, I'll bring those things to the board for discussion, and you all can make recommendations to city council to support different aspects of that. Or if there's gaps that you all see that we aren't focusing on. So Ralph, you bring up a really good point of what happens to the existing vehicles that are internal combustion engines on the road. That has not been addressed. That's been a question that I've had for quite a while that I haven't seen a lot of folks really wade into, other than looking at when vehicles come to the end of their useful life, which, as you know, can be a considerable amount of time. You know, that policies on a larger scale than the municipal scale would be in place. So as you all probably know, California just passed a policy that I think it's 2035. They'll no longer allow any additional internal combustion engines. So that's probably where that's going to happen, is, you know, when at some point in time, folks will no longer be able to purchase an internal combustion engine. I think that's pretty far down the road. There is technology available. There's a company actually in Loveland that I know our fleet manager met with not too long ago that does conversions of existing vehicles. I think my understanding of that, and I haven't looked into it for a while, is that that can be pretty cost prohibitive, and I haven't really heard anybody looking at scaling up that option, scaling up that option, if I'm saying that right. So if anyone else has information on that, I'd be very curious to hear it. Mostly it's really, the efforts are focusing on transitioning people away from those vehicles, but I do think it's an important component to consider, you know, the waste that would be associated if just like with anything, when we're talking about building electrification too, and people replacing appliances, we don't usually want somebody to swap out a perfectly useful appliance. I think transportation is somewhat different in the sense that we also have additional, you know, air quality impacts and things like that. But that's a great question. And then what was the last? I know you had one more.
The sort, you know, how power companies are
managing the load.
Yes.
Yep. So that is part of our greenhouse gas in modeling, was looking at, as we transition to meeting these goals, what's the projected power use that's going to be required in that. And I'll look to some of my LPC colleagues. I know Daryl Hahn isn't available today, but that's very much on our radar to do that analysis from a load standpoint of what is the potential load impact and what is the impact to our existing infrastructure, and what are the additional needs that might require to accommodate that load. Does anyone from LPC want to jump in real quick before we transition to someone else? Thanks, Susan.
Sure. I just confirm what Lisa's mentioned, that we're working with Platte River and the other owner communities to identify what the adoption curve may look like, so that we know what to expect and consider that in forecasting for future capacity. But we're also wanting to use that same information to help us understand what it's going to look like to have EV potential as vehicle to grid battery resources. So, you know, there's the meeting the capacity, and then there's also the opportunity that's associated with using those customer devices to help balance our load. So there's a lot, and we're working on it, but we don't know exactly what that future looks like yet.
Thank you.
Thanks,
both very
Susan.
much.
Michelle has a question.
Yeah, it was really informative. Thanks, Lisa. It might be jumping the gun, but I was kind of curious what the city plan was for the public chargers. Is it more like paying per minute, or is it some free ones depending on the area, or is it all free ones downtown? Or yeah, I was just kind of curious about that side of it.
Yeah, that's also a great question. So our publicly owned charging stations, which we have, I think, 5 of now, we've added a couple, were free until, I believe, last year we changed them to be $1 an hour. Part of this regional plan is looking at pricing structures, and that it's definitely not consistent across communities. And also, you know, we control what we can charge from our public charging. we can't control what other privately owned charging facilities offer, but we can at least try to create some best practices around that. So I would say that's a little bit further down the road, but it's something that is part of this conversation for sure. And also understanding, how do we help drive that uptake as well, which is why we did have free stations for a while, but I'm not sure if we'll go back to that. But I can't answer that at this time. We don't know that yet.
Mary.
You're on mute, Mary.
Okay, and how do I take my hand down? I guess under your lower hand. Okay. Hi. Okay, so I have so many questions and concerns about this plan. First off, based on presentations and extensive questions that have been generated by this board, I don't have any belief that Longmont or PRPA, especially as our co-owned power facility, will be providing us all renewable energy by 2035. And the cost of moving to electric vehicles is prohibitive for, at this point, the majority of families. The majority of families say that they are not planning to do this. They don't think they're going to be able to afford it. So why are we engaging in an exercise of forcing folks to use and buy a very expensive electric vehicle that's going to run on coal power for the foreseeable future? That does not seem equitable. It doesn't seem fair. And I'm really wondering when the call came out to the local communities to vote on this plan, to see whether or not the people that we in theory are representing and that city council is representing and the city employees representing decided that this is what they wanted to do. So that's my first question. And I would like to hear some responses to that from city employees and city council.
Marsha, I'm happy to jump in, or if you want to respond first, please feel free.
Well, sure. This PRPA's power plan involves shutting down Rawhide coal plant by 2030. So their commitment to do that is pretty strong. They don't have a firm plan for getting completely off fossil fuels. So they're looking at 12 to 15% natural gas as being sources of electricity still in 2030. And there are a bunch of initiatives going on to change that, which include being a member of a regional transmission authority by that point, and also by encouraging local generation. PRPA is pretty ambivalent about that, I would say, but they're going to have to do it. And there really are not good ways for the PRPA to stop the cities from developing distributed energy resources. So I think that Longmont at least is well positioned to be doing its share by 2030 or thereabouts. And the benefits of using electric vehicles kick in terms of reduced emissions well before your electricity is 100% renewable. So you're an EV that is powered by 45–50%. I'm not sure what, it depends on the vehicle, obviously. Where the trade-off, where the break-even point comes in, but it's not at 100% renewable. It's at somewhere between 40 and 60% renewable, depending on the efficiency of the vehicle. So that alone is going to justify Longmont investing in electric vehicle charging infrastructure. as well as PRPA investing in electric vehicle charging arbitration software. And the city managers are now pretty much on the case of PRPA for having let that program lapse. So that should reappear fairly soon. I would like to add that I don't think switching over one-to-one to electric vehicles is the whole plan. What we need to do is lower the percentage of people that use a personal automobile. And there are a number of ways to address that. And between the city and the economic development partners, we're looking at many. So, you know, we need to get rid of cars.
Yeah, thank you,
They're dumb.
Marsha. And Murray, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I understand that you believe that we need to get rid of cars, Marcia, but I'd like to know what the people who live in Longmont feel about that, since we are in theory representing the people in Longmont. So at what point are the people who are the public wanting to heard, are they going to be able to weigh in? I'm wondering if, you know, some of the people who are here might have something to say about this.
When we're finished with this item and we go to public invited to be heard, then the public will be able to address the board.
Great, thank you.
And Mary, if you'd like an answer about how Longmont residents feel about cars, it is a demographically variable answer. So our younger people in Longmont are not as excited about cars, but our older people don't want to change. That's
I would like to see the research that was done.
Can't produce it today.
What I can share with you, Mary, so we have done quite a bit of community engagement through the Envision Longmont Comprehensive Plan, the Sustainability Plan. We have the Climate Action Recommendations Report. We have the Transportation Roadmap, which sadly started right as COVID started. So our community engagement process was pretty cut short, but we did a number of informational interviews and focus groups through that process. The reason that we didn't do an EV readiness roadmap, we did a transportation roadmap, was for exactly the reasons that you're saying, is to recognize that for our community, EVs are going to be a solution and accessible to some people and not all people, and that we have to focus on all modes of transportation and making all modes of transportation easily accessible and affordable and complete within our community. And there are a lot of strategies that came out of that, and strategies particularly in the Envision Longmont Multimodal Transportation Plan that look at completing our bike network, our trails network, our sidewalks, our transit, all of that sort of stuff. And so this is not looking, we are not looking at EVs in isolation. This plan was an opportunity for us to take some of the recommendations that we have already heard as priorities from the community and from City Council, and do a deeper dive, particularly in the electric vehicle aspect, and do that on a regional scale so that we can collaborate with regional partners. We can leverage funding and expertise and all of those things that I mentioned earlier. And yeah, as Marcia said, you're going to get a different response depending on some of the folks that you talk to. But part of this plan with regard specifically to electric vehicles is looking at those aspects of how do we make electric vehicles more accessible to folks that can't just buy a brand new vehicle because they want to, right? So that is part of that, of what's the education and outreach as we look to develop potentially incentive programs. How are we doing that in a way that involves the folks that are those folks that may want an electric vehicle, but they are not accessible to people? You know, how do we meet people where they're at? And if that's not accessible or people don't want to do that, what are the other options available to people that still help meet our transportation emissions reductions goals and meet people's transportation needs, and also have those air quality benefits that Marcia mentioned as well. I do have, we have that community engagement feedback that I can share with you that's been done in different areas. Yeah, and then to Marcia's point, also, we have done the modeling on what is our current emission factor based on our current energy mix, and to understand at what point it makes sense for us to electrify both buildings and vehicles. We have run those numbers to make sure that we are not pushing something that has a greater emissions impact because of our energy mix. And those numbers are already at a point with renewables to make that make sense, and especially as we ramp up renewables and we ramp up electrification. So we do also have that modeling methodology that we can share with folks that essentially says, yes, we are still, 50 to 60% fossil fuel based, but our emission factor shows that this does make sense, and especially because we know it's going to take time to really get people to where we want to be.
I also have concerns about the non-personal transportation vehicles, that there is no good alternative to diesel and so-called fossil fuels. For example, the idea that farmers are going to be replacing tractors and farm equipment that can run for 70 years with electric vehicles that you can use for a couple hours, and then you have to drive back to your station and charge for 5 hours, especially when peak times for using these vehicles is 15, 18 hours a day during harvest and planting seasons. That's extremely unrealistic. And by reducing and eliminating the infrastructure for diesel, we're really hampering the ability of to grow our own food. We also have more people than ever who are working from home, and their cars are lasting longer and longer and longer. We have 20-year-old cars. There's nothing wrong with them at our house. We work from home. Those cars will easily last another 10 or 15 years. I'm wondering if the modeling was done pre-pandemic and is modeling for people that were driving a lot more than we are driving now, period. It just seems to me like this whole picture could put us in, considering that our unstable energy markets and access to energy currently that the world is experiencing, especially the US, it seems to me that we would be benefited to do some reassessment and to slow our roll with this crush forward to make everything electric. And that's all I'm going to say on this for now. We can move on.
Thanks, Mary. I do just want to touch really quickly. There's nothing in this that is saying anything about farming equipment and that kind of stuff. I can't.
That's right, and I think that's a problem, because we're ignoring that by eliminating the infrastructure. We may leave ourselves extremely vulnerable.
I don't
Nothing
think
about
that
eliminating any infrastructure.
No, yeah.
That isn't a goal. I mean, I understand that is a goal by the think tanks who are, I've seen walking around Longmont advising us on some of these things, is to eliminate fossil fuel so-called infrastructure. But even if it is not eliminated, it's just rarefied. That usually makes the cost of any commodity available in such a fashion be very, very high. And that also could result in much higher food costs. Looking at this ecosystemically, I'm concerned.
Longmont isn't a farm community.
Boulder
Thanks, ma'am.
County is increasingly a farm community, and I could speak to that at some point with the growth of the regional food hubs and the percentage of people who want to buy local food and are buying local food, and the increasing numbers of acres that are being used to grow our local produce.
Thanks, Mary.
Thanks. I actually had a couple questions and a comment, actually. So the modeling that I've seen out of the Department of Energy shows that for most the more efficient electric vehicles, that they become net emission saving, even at being completely charged on a fossil fuel grid. So you don't need to have a green grid to save emissions. The benefits start immediately, just because the efficiencies are so high. Now, if you have a poorly designed electric vehicle, I imagine that doesn't hold up. So, and that's one of the biggest arguments that people make against electric vehicles, is that we charge them with grids that are only partially renewable. But that, at least from the Department of Energy's modeling, that actually kicks in immediately. So I had questions, but Marcia, you want to respond to that?
I'm I have nothing but agreement that, you know, that it's very early in the electrification of the grid when electric vehicles start making sense. So I don't disagree with that finding at all. I was raising my hand because I wanted to also point out that there are alternative net zero fuel sources for vehicles that have to operate for a long period of time, and you know, for heavy equipment. For example, Longmont's garbage waste diversion fleet now runs on methane that is entirely net zero, produced locally. So, you know, you don't have to assume that requiring net zero vehicles 100% means that it all has to be electric.
Is that the LNG that's being generated at the landfill, Marcia, or at the sewage plant?
At the sewage plant.
Right. That was an idea that was brought in by Bill, what's his last name? Alt, I think. Anyway.
Bill Altman
Yeah.
advocates that idea, but Longmont didn't get the idea from him. Longmont has been working on that independently for a long time.
So, but what is the cost of that, relatively speaking, for a farmer? And what is the projected cost for replacing tractors? Or can tractors be converted to LNG at a cost that wouldn't make food prohibitively expensive? Does anyone?
I really think it's a red herring to be talking about tractors and city policy in the same discussion. So I think that's really too far afield.
Well, and I think that's a problem, is that we aren't thinking as ecosystemically as we could be, because these are issues that have a ramification. What we do in the grid is going to affect our ability to provide education, to have local industry, to grow our food, and so forth. So I don't see this as a red herring at all. I think we need more ecosystemic discussions and multivariate analyses.
All right, so I actually had a couple of questions. So one was, you know, with the new Inflation Reduction Act and the incentives for electric vehicles and for electric, you know, charging stations. So two of those things come about. One is, I think, so this, I only have national numbers, but I think we're at 10% now, the latest data for electric vehicle adoption. And with the new incentives that don't kick in until January, you can imagine that the adoption curve gets steeper than it would have been otherwise. So one thing is, I don't know if there's been any discussion of changing the projections from the modeled adoption curves, but that could be, that could change pretty dramatically. The transition from horse-drawn carriages to you know, internal combustion engine vehicles happened in 10 years, 100% basically happened in 10 years. So that can happen. So that might be something to pay attention to. I don't know if that's been looked at. I know the IRA just came out, you know, a few weeks ago.
Yeah. I mean, we are definitely paying attention to the IRA and how we can capitalize on the resources that are available through that. The modeling that we did was not based on existing adoption curves. It was based on meeting our greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals and what we would need to do in order to get there to meet those. I hope that you're right in those adoption curves. I do want to be cognizant of who gets left behind in that process, and that's where I think we do want to make sure we are focusing resources as well to make sure that, you know, we aren't leaving people behind in that process. But I haven't seen research on adoption curves recently with regards to EVs, so I imagine it's changed since the last time I had a look at it.
Yeah.
I just wanted to respond to Charles and to say that my understanding is that the reason why internal combustion vehicles were adopted so readily is because innovators like Ford were adopting the latest practices in manufacturing and automation. And unless we have an economic game changer like that, which makes electric vehicles extraordinarily efficient, long-running, and inexpensive, I don't see how we would have any such phenomena occurring in terms of accelerating the adoption, especially since, as folks in this meeting have said, the younger folks who tend to be the early adopters of anything are not interested in having more cars.
Yeah, so the adoption curves we see in China that are over 20% now, and in China they have a much lower per capita income than we have in the US. So that's actually a proof of concept that even in lower income areas, you can have very high adoption curves. Europe, of course, is economically better off than China in terms of per capita income, but the adoption curves in Europe are also in the 20% range now. And so, and some places like Norway, the adoption curve is like 85 to 90%. So, there are definitely places where it's very high. And in terms of range, some of these vehicles get over 500 miles of range. Kind of the average EV gets about 300 mile range now. So for most people's average daily commute or trips, is under 30 miles a day on average. So having ranges that's already 10 times that is kind of high. And in fact, you're carrying around a large battery for additional capacity or range that you don't actually use. Both expensive and also it hurts your efficiency. So there's lots of aspects to this that and people of course have choice and they can buy less expensive vehicles. The new Chevy Volt, the newest version that's coming out after the $7,500 new incentives will put those into the mid $20,000 range. So they're relatively economically accessible. That the average vehicle in the US now is sold as almost $50,000. So it's amazing how expensive the average vehicle has gotten. Anyway, but I had a second question. So one other thing is in the IRA, there's also incentives for private enterprise to install charging stations. And so is there also efforts to maybe partner with private enterprise? Because the reason I ask is because I forget how many it was, but there's like 2,500 charging stations that were proposed or something like that. And if I remember correctly, what's that?
2380. Yep.
2380. Okay. And if I remember correctly, a charging station, the cheapest ones I've seen cost like $40,000 to install, and the more expensive ones are upwards of 100,000, which seemed crazy.
Yeah, level twos are not anywhere. I mean, it depends. The machine itself is $6,000 to $8,000. That may have gone up with inflation. I haven't kept track of that, but the other installation costs can be higher depending on what's involved in the installation itself. But part of that mapping process that I talked about will help identify where we would want to site stations, will help inform those partnership pieces that you're talking about. I do think there's big opportunity to partner with private entities to install charging infrastructure. One, because folks want to do that. We get contacted often by folks that are just looking for help, that want to do their own private stations for either their employees or their tenants or whomever it might be. But also because I don't think it's necessarily going to make sense that the city pay for all of those to be public charging stations. So I think that there's definitely going to be a lot of opportunity for partnerships in that process. But the mapping piece, I think, will be hugely informative, first and foremost, to help us figure out where stations already are and where they need to go, and who do we work with in that process.
Yeah, I think we need to clarify between level 2 and level 3 stations. So like the ones at the museum are level 2 charging stations. And that's the $8,000 cost. The ones up at Walmart and at Target in Boulder are battery backed level 3 charging stations. And that's the figure that Charles quoted.
Yeah, those are the much higher cost stations.
Right.
Those are the fast charging stations.
Because for people who own homes and can do charging at home overnight, etc., that's fine. That's a way to charge your electric vehicle. But for someone, for example, who lives in an apartment complex who doesn't have the ability to charge at home, and oftentimes are maybe on the lower income side of the economic spectrum, they need to charge, for example, at public charging stations, and level 2 is really slow. So in some ways, they're the ones who most need it, but at the same time, the level 2s are just slow compared to the level 3s. And so that could be really useful. And kind of like one other, and I just, when we had the fuel distribution network that was installed in the basically in the 1920s, as we adopted the internal combustion engine, that happened actually relatively quickly. And we don't see public gas stations. We only see private gas stations. So I wonder if there's also any thinking about, would we be installing public infrastructure that eventually becomes either obsolete or unused because the private sector just installs their own power distribution, in this case, in terms of electric vehicle charging stations, that basically makes our efforts on installing stations superfluous.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's many reasons why we would want to think carefully about city investment in owning public charging for many reasons, but we're not always the most nimble, and as technology changes, it's harder for us. And so I think we want to be very cognizant of what those potential trends are and how we're setting ourselves up as an organization for those investments and what that means long term. So I think those are all things that are part of our evaluation process as we move forward into this space, and a space that is changing pretty rapidly. Part of that mapping process also is looking at things like dwell time. So to your point of understanding, where is the best place to start site charging, and also what type of charging makes the most sense in those space given the dwell time that people usually spend in certain places, and does that accommodate, like you're saying, whether it should be level 2 or level 3, or how do we accommodate folks that don't have ability to charge at home? All of those sorts of things are part of, at least part of the conversation. Like, it's a complicated puzzle to put all the pieces together.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, and appreciate how complicated that is. And it's not easy. Definitely don't want to put city resources into something that becomes an unused asset. So.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Looks like Mary has another question.
Yeah. So how is it even legal for the city to put in public stations, charging stations, considering Tabor?
I might maybe tap Becky if she wants to jump in on that. I don't think that there's a link there, but I don't know enough about the ins and outs of Tabor and the requirements for cities.
Yeah, I'm not sure that Tabor is applicable in that there is a provision in the code that allows for resale of the electric commodity. It's essentially because we're selling the electricity is, I think, the concept.
Okay, but isn't part of Tabor not competing with private entities, where private entities may be interested in entering that field? I mean, I just wonder, I would be interested to know if there's been any sort of legal analysis or discussion of this issue.
I think I can answer that. There's enterprises, municipal enterprises and other state level enterprises are an exception to Tabor regulations where an entity is in fact permitted to compete. Some of the problems with the financial weakness, I guess I should say, of rural hospitals were corrected by changing the Medicare and Medicaid distribution mechanism into a state enterprise. And our utilities are state enterprises as well and can operate in the private sector.
I would also offer that there's you know, the market is not currently competitive, and, you know, we would continue to monitor that, you know, if that becomes an issue as additional charging stations come online.
I think if it's okay, I'd like to move us on because I know we do have public invited to be heard.
I was just going to recommend that. Lisa. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl.
Perfect. Okay, so we're now at the public invited to be heard section of our meeting today. So we have, understand 3 community members who are going to join us to speak.
We actually have 4.
4 now. Okay,
Yep.
excellent. Fantastic. 4. So we're going to open it up to the public to be heard section. Each person who is willing to speak will be unmuted to speak one at a time. When it's your turn to speak, please state your name and address for the record. And you'll have 3 minutes for comment, and I'm going to time you.
All right. First up, we have Kim.
Hi, I'm Kim Edmondson of Bittersweet Lane here in Longmont. I am a concerned citizen of this town with many questions about this electrification plan you have going forward. First off, was these even put up to a vote by the community? Who signed on for this UN-driven global agenda? As I see, you're all on board with banning the sale of gas-powered vehicles and moving everyone into EVs, including, due to equity, the poor, and trying to make public transit electric as well. I don't like breathing exhaust either, but have you considered that many experts are speaking out? Even Elon Musk has said that we do not have enough raw materials to put everyone in electric cars, which, by the way, it takes 50 tons of ore being mined to make one. 30 pounds of lithium, 60 pounds of cobalt, 130 pounds of nickel, 90 pounds of copper, 190 pounds of graphite, and another 500 pounds of steel, aluminum, manganese, plastic, and other materials for making these batteries. Do you not care about the environmental impact this mining is having in the places mining these resources, or care about the child slave labor to get the cobalt, or that processed cobalt that is causing cancer in those processing it, or the carbon footprint to transport all these resources to factories that make these cars, or the carbon release just to extract the raw materials? Then there are the smart meters that seem to be crucial in this rollout. I have voiced my concerns before regarding EMF, RMF radiation coming off these meters. Their cumulative dose from these paired with 4G, 5G, and everything else that's Wi-Fi and wireless in everyone's home will only increase cancer rates across the board eventually. There is even a 25% increase in colon cancers from people carrying their phones in their back pocket. A person can shut off their phone and move it away from their body, but you can't remove a smart meter from your house without a fee. Which, speaking of, that doesn't seem very equitable when you have to pay to opt out of that. The only reason I can see that smart meters are crucial for any of this is to charge citizens more money to pay for your green pipe dream. You already upped everyone's utility bill without asking. Have you learned nothing about what's going on elsewhere in the world where they have tried going all renewable and it has failed horribly? California is not allowed to run their AC during heat waves or charge electric cars. All of this despite a large chunk of their population leaving after COVID. Germans are looking at freezing this winter because renewables are not cutting it. They have gone back to mining coal to keep from freezing. So much for their air quality. And recently, 4 Italian climate scientists all came out and said that climate emergency is a hoax. The data does not show any extreme patterns in temperature or weather events. Their data found that increased carbon actually increased greenery and crop yields. It's basically a great plant food. So really, a much easier solution and affordable solution would be to plant more trees and halt further growth and development of the community. So it doesn't need so much electricity and water. It looks nicer. It doesn't kill birds, require tons of mining or child slave labor out of Africa, will not radiate my children. It's much prettier and safer. And by the way, those smart meters change the chemistry of trees, causing them to produce more terpenes, making them more flammable and kills them eventually. So perhaps so much so it's not the climate causing fires as much
Kim,
as
your
enough
3
radiation.
minutes are up, so thank you for your comment. Thank you.
Next up, we have Elsie.
Hello, my name is Elsie Wilkins, and I am a concerned citizen of Boulder County. My address is 8664 Middle Fork Road, and I have several questions. So my understanding is that electric vehicles are powered by electricity from an outside source, such as a home or a public charging station. Since they are powered by electricity and not burning fuel, battery electric vehicles do not physically emit any greenhouse gases. However, if the electricity that the electric cars are powered by is created by combustion of fossil fuels, electric vehicles are no more green than any average internal combustion engine vehicle. I have a question about the environmental impact and the human impact. Has there been any consideration by the board, by the city council, on acquiring an environmental impact report and a cost benefit analysis? It seems to me like people that would be more affected are the non-Hispanic community and minorities in general. And however, nothing came up in this meeting that there has been an environmental impact report or a human impact report. And that is a huge concern. You were talking about community outreach. How are you reaching the community? Are you asking the public, do we want this? Or are we being imposed to have more 5G towers that are very harmful, emitting more EMF? There are hundreds of studies that confirm the danger and the bad effects on our health, on your brains, on your skin, and the increase of cancer, all kinds of harmful effects. And are there going to be more smart meters and possibly more 5G towers near schools and near residential areas or in residential areas? Would you please consider this? Thank you very much for all the information. And thank you, Mary Lynn. Your statements were wonderful, and your concerns are also my concerns. And you are talking for a lot of other people in the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elsie. Next,
Next, we have Jeff Jones.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you very much. My name is Jeff Jones. I'm a resident of Boulder County. My address is 3537 Nyland Way. And this is my first board meeting, so I'm just trying to catch up to speed here. And my concern and interest here is smart meters, and I am curious what the board has done as far as researching the pros and cons and the decision-making process that they've been using. So I would like to get up to speed, and I'm thinking something like that would help me do that. Any other suggestions would be appreciated. Thanks for all the work that you guys are doing.
great. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate your comments. And next, Heather, who do we have?
We have Joe Kelly with us.
Joe.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. This is Joe Kelly of Barberry Drive in Longmont. I was recently at the Niwot Honeybee Festival. I was appalled at the numbers of well-meaning people I spoke to who have no concept or were in denial that the microwave emitting cell phones in their hands or pockets, along with everything necessary to maintain a wireless world, are likely a large contributing factor to the massive decline of bees and other insects in the world. If I'm correct, your October meeting will have a presentation on pollinators by city staff. I will be sending you an email with lots of links wherein is contained a small fraction of the science on electromagnetic fields and microwaves in particular, and their effects on living things, and specifically the bees. I therefore charge you with studying the things I send, as well as doing your own research into this topic, so that you may ask thoughtful, intelligent questions of city staff on what is being done to protect the pollinators from ambient ubiquitous microwaves. Will you please ask what the city will do to protect the insects from the invisible microwave mesh network that is coming soon to our airways with the AMI? In a recent meeting, you made a list of questions to present them. With any luck, the links I send will add much fuel to your hopefully burning curiosity on this issue. I also charge you with reading in full my email containing the letter to our city council from eminent retired Professor Ole Johansson, formerly of Sweden's Karolinska Institute, on the topic of AMI and our disappearing bees. He wrote and sent it on August the 9th, and I delivered it in part at the city council meeting that evening. The subject of electromagnetic wireless microwave radiation is a forgotten topic to do with the disappearance of pollinators. People acknowledge that neonics and other pesticides are killing our bees, but it doesn't even occur to most that there is another invisible toxin contributing to this frightening decline. And as seeing is believing, will the SAB request a grant for a radio frequency meter that can be loaned out from the library, whereby people can see and learn how their homes are being polluted by this energy? Other places have done this. Why not us? I can tell you where to purchase a good one. In October, will you broach these topics in your meeting? Colorado recently passed legislation to study our disappearing pollinators. Will they study the EMF factor in this research? Will you, as part of sustainability, insist that they do? Will you initiate a health effects study on the people in the AMI test zone and in another control area? I'm told by Professor Johansson this would be a simple experiment and no one need know why they're being asked general health questions. Over time, we could collect some very useful data on the effects of the meters on health. I know you're working on
your time is up.
electrification today. I'm
Thank
on
you
the
for your
last sentence.
comment. Thank you, Doe. All right, I think that's it for comments from the public. I think we can move on to our next topic or item, which is other business. So do we have other business?
We don't have any other business.
Excellent. So we can move on to the next item on our agenda, which is items from staff. So Becky, you look like you have our first item.
I do, and I think Heather's going to help me out with this. Oh, am I out of time then? Okay, great. So we've chatted previously, I think a couple meetings ago, about the storm drainage bond issue that we'll see on the ballot in November or in October when they hit our mailboxes. And we also wanted to talk about the charter amendment issues that'll be before you also on that same ballot. So I'm here to share with you some facts about those ballot items. And Heather, if you could go to the next slide. And none of the information that I'm sharing currently is to urge you to vote one way or other, just to make sure that we have information about these out in the public. And you as an advisory board are a really important conduit, to the rest of the community. So that's why we're here. So we have, as I mentioned, 3 items. Is it 3A? I think 3A is the first one we're talking about here. So there's 2 charter amendments that are proposed. One, which is a little bit of cleanup in the charter to make the following changes to allow the city to use electronic signatures for council documents. There are electronic signature processes in place for items that are not official documents and don't require the mayor's the signature, sort of on that ordinance and resolution vein. But because of the language in the charter and the interpretation of that, we are still required to use, pen and ink signatures for official council documents. One proposed amendment is to allow city employees who don't live within the city boundaries to serve on city retirement boards. So that's a change, just potentially recognizing the change in our employee population that now often lives in neighboring communities, which is different likely than when the charter was drafted. A change is proposed to allow for administrative approval of low or no cost agreements with other governmental entities. Currently, all agreements with other entities include intergovernmental agreements come to council for approval, even those that may have no cost to the city. So this is wanting to align the approval levels for those with other purchasing guidelines. So that's sort of an alignment piece there. A proposed amendment to align city election rules with state rules with regards to, when election results are finalized. And then there is a separate charter amendment because it's sort of a fairly different topic. Those first several bullet points there are really all about the conduct of city business. Whereas that last one is to allow sitting council members an option to end their term as they run for a different position on the council. So they could presumptively resign a seat so that the election to fill that vacated seat could be run concurrently with the election that they're participating in. So on the next slide, we have a few pros and cons for these items. So this first one is that related to the conduct of city business. In general, those who support that believe that it's modernizing. Those who are opposed believe that we should not make changes to the charter. It's like the Constitution, you shouldn't change it, all the time. So those are, and you can read some of the other information regarding that there on the slide. And moving on to the change in the election rules, or that allowing for that presumptive vacation of a seat. You can see here a few arguments for and against. And, again, an argument against making that change being that we should not change the charter. This is because it's that formative document for city governance. So I think maybe, hey, I'll take some questions if you have any questions about the charter amendments. Or, storm drainage bonds, though we have previously discussed that.
Thank you, Becky. Any questions about those changes? Doesn't look like it. All right, thank you, Becky. That was great. I think we can move on to the next item from staff, which is building electrification plan support letter. And Susan, I think, is going to discuss that with us.
Thanks, Charles. In your packet, there is a draft letter of support from your board that we've recommended that you consider to support the beneficial building electrification plan. Staff will be taking that final plan to City Council on October 11th. Oh, thanks, Heather. And it's helpful for City Council to know your feelings on this effort. And so I assume you've read it. And Heather, I can take questions about it, or do you all just need to vote on whether or not you want to provide a letter of support?
So I'm not sure if everyone has had a chance to read the letter, and we might want to, Heather, I don't know what protocol is, but we're missing, I think, 3 board members today.
Yes, but we have a quorum with 3, so you all can vote on it if you would like.
Any comments about voting on the letter of support for the building electrification plan? Ralph.
When I read the letter, I thought it was kind of straightforward, but I'm realizing through the discussion today and taking some time today actually to read through the plan that this letter would support, that these are complex issues that I can't say that I understand well enough to vote on. So I would either have to abstain or recommend that we spend a little more time in discussion. I don't want to hold anything up. I'm a newbie and I'm learning as we go, but I feel a little uncomfortable to rubber stamp this without making sure, and I got this and I spent, a half hour, 40 minutes reading through this, but just wondering how other people feel about this. I'm just sharing sort of some innocent thoughts about, do we want to understand more about this? What is the import of this letter? Are we overstepping by not making sure that we understand the impact of it? And have we done, do we have enough homework and understanding of what we're doing? If it doesn't matter and it's administrative, there's many more important things happening in the world to worry about it. But again, without clearly understanding the impact of it, I'm just wondering what advice some of the other more experienced people, could share about this.
So, so it depends on which aspect, but some of the different pieces, I've read up on some of it. It's a lot of things are either inconclusive or it's pretty hard to disprove some things, like that people say there's a detrimental effect. They can't necessarily prove that there is for certain things, and you could debate these things for years, and it's kind of up to any individual to say when they've decided to believe one side or the other. People disagree about all kinds of stuff. There are people who believe the world is flat, and so and you're never going to convince them that it is otherwise unless you maybe send them up to space or something. So I personally am fine with these issues myself, but I think it's up to each individual board member to decide. Mary?
I appreciate Ralph's concern, and at this point, I would vote against endorsing the electrification plan. So if there are people who are interested in this and would like to learn more about it, then I say let's go ahead and schedule some more time to learn more about it and to gather more public input. Thanks for bringing that up, Ralph.
Susan, so you mentioned wanting to present this at, I think, the October 11th council meeting, I think is what you said. Is that date, is there like a major motivation for doing it at that council meeting and not at a subsequent one?
I think the motivation is that we have, it was about an 18-month planning process where we convened an advisory committee, and I've presented on our process and some of our findings to the board before, but I realized that we have new members. And so understand the questions there, but we went through this 18-month process where we had an advisory board that included Councilmember Martin and Mayor Peck as council representatives. We had representatives from Boulder County, from Platte River Power Authority. We had two well-informed resident members of the committee, as well as folks from staff. We also engaged stakeholders along the way. We had some focus groups. We had one-on-one interviews with folks in other communities. We did some surveys. And so we gathered public input and to formulate the plan. And I guess an answer to your question, which I'm sort of getting around to, Charles, is that it took us that much time to develop it. We've presented on it. We've shared it along the way. October 11th is actually our second choice date. We wanted to present on August 23rd, but we were bumped from the agenda from that evening. So it's sort of the next best chance for us to get the plan in front of council for a thumbs up or a thumbs down. There are things in the plan that we believe are important to get started on. And we don't want to lose momentum, especially as the impacts of the Inflation Reduction Act start to unfold. We want to kind of be proactive and prepared for what's coming down the pike on electrification. And I'll say also that building electrification was one of the Climate Action Task Force recommendations that were approved by City Council at the end of 2020. So we have some momentum going, and we kind of have this mandate to get started doing the work.
Got it. Thanks, Susan. Marcia.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that I don't think, you know, the beneficial electrification plan is an implementation roadmap and a loose timeline for the city's conversion. I think, Susan, how much have you been able to do in terms of adjusting your timeline based on the constraints imposed by the IRA? Have you attempted that yet, or?
I think that it's hard to adjust timelines for sure, because I don't have a good sense of how that's going to unfold at the state level. We know some things that will begin in 2023, but there are a lot of development, program development that needs to happen at the state level that may not happen until 2024. And so we want to understand how that's going to unfold. That doesn't mean we can't get started on, information, education, and outreach, talking to our workforce, kind of getting the framework in place so that as these programs become available, as the benefits from the IRA become available, we're ready to be complementary with them in our efforts. So the answer to your question is no, those things aren't worked directly into the plan timeline, but our timelines for strategies in the plan are flexible enough. Like Marcia said, it's a roadmap. It's how we get started. And the way I view a lot of our city plans is we get going and then we have course corrections along the way as we get new information, as we learn more about what that landscape will look like with the IRA. What I would hate to do is sit back and say, we can't do anything until we know exactly how this is all going to unfold. Then we've lost our time to prepare.
I think that's a really good answer. And to say to the board, what I would like to say is by voting yes to endorse, you're really endorsing the concept of beneficial electrification and the general order of implementation that it proposes, as opposed to endorsing things like we're going to adopt this code set in 2023. I don't think that, in my opinion, at least, the meaning of the endorsement is not at that level of detail, because the plan is adaptable.
Right. I think what you would be supporting or not supporting in general, and Marcia, I think you make a good point there, is, of course, I want you to be aware of what's in the plan, and what the efforts look like and what we hope to accomplish relative to greenhouse gas emissions and kind of equitable deployment of activities. But what your letter says is that we believe that building electrification is imminent. We need to be proactive in how we address it as a community. And we believe that this plan is a good way for us to get started.
So I'm sorry, I have to leave, everybody. So bye, have a good rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Marcia.
Sure.
So unless anyone else has a comment, maybe we should see if anyone has a motion whether to vote on the support letter for the building electrification plan. Comments or a motion? I can move, right? Mary's trust in me in terms of Robert's Rules of Order was probably misplaced.
Actually, yes, as the chair, you can move because you're still a board member.
I
Okay.
just wanted you to be the chair so that we would all pay attention if one of your cats walked across the screen.
I'm at work. Unfortunately, no cats here. So I'll move that we, let's see, support.
Charles, we can't hear you if you're talking. Or I can't hear you anyway.
Oh, I can hear him.
Oh, no, never mind. That's me. I can't hear Susan either. I think I just did something weird. Sorry.
Sorry, Lisa. So I move that we approve the building electrification plan letter of support.
Do we have a second?
I
Second,
second it.
those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against? Lisa, and those, oh, sorry, Mary, those abstaining. Ralph, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm sorry that I don't feel informed enough to know what, so I'll leave it to the discretion of the wiser people. So I abstain.
Okay, thank you. All right. Thank you, Susan. So we had a 2, 4, 1 against and 1 abstain. All right. Next item on our agenda is items from the board. Does the board have any items?
I do have one quick thing. I know it's getting late. And that is, I wanted to, I'm sorry, if recognized, I do have a point.
Yes, it is. It's getting late. You said it's getting late. Did I hear that right?
I said it's getting late, but I did have a quick comment,
Okay,
if recognized.
go ahead, Ralph.
I had the experience of these nice people that came and spoke today when I came to a city council meeting a month or so ago about the noise issues in town, of wading through a lot of business I wasn't there for, and then making a point and was thanked for my 3 minutes with no follow-up. And I even asked the question how, as a citizen, I could participate, and was told that this was not the appropriate forum to make a contribution, to figure out how to make a contribution. And I was interested in Doe Kelly's the letter from Professor Johansson and the issue of pollination, and people made comments, and I had some questions about trying to get this, trying to get data from a couple people so that I could research some of the points that they made. And I just wondered about the process. I'm going to just put this on the table because it is late. I'm actually leaving town early tomorrow morning, so I need to go as well. That the process where somebody, like Kim or Elsie has to wait through an hour and a half to make their 3-minute point, and then there's not even any opportunity for discussion, doesn't seem fruitful to me, either in terms of the contribution of people who take their time to come and make their comments, or for the board to benefit from understanding what their comments are. Again, as a new person, I don't want to ruffle any feathers. I want to just express that I'd be interested to know at some point how this is helpful and how we can make it, better point would be how we can make it more helpful. so that the comments that people made could be explored, or we would have resources on how to contact them, or some way that they're taking their time and commitment to come and share comments for our benefit, that we do all we can to take advantage of that.
Mary?
I agree, Ralph. That's been an imbalance, and I felt like an ingracious, or at the very minimum awkward issue and process, I would rather say. And at times in the past, we have informally simply asked questions of the public that have invited to be heard, and asked them to clarify and to send information. And there were different people on the board. It was a different time. I was tempted to do that in this board meeting to help people feel gracious and welcome, and because I did have questions. But I would like to move that we put on the agenda that we discuss this at a future meeting, coming up with a more gracious and inclusive way of engaging with the public invited to be heard. So thank you for bringing it up.
And if that motion is on the table, I would second that motion.
I don't think there was a motion, Ralph.
There was kind of a motion. I move.
That part of Robert's Rules of Order, I do understand.
I move that at a future meeting, we that we schedule a time at a future meeting to discuss coming up with a more gracious and inclusive and productive process for addressing the public invited to be heard. Perhaps some dialogue. That's my motion.
If I may also interject, we do have standards and processes through, the city that we also need to make sure that we are in alignment with. So there might be an opportunity to do some, education about, these are sort of the lines in which we need to color, like the framework that we can make those adjustments within. So, but we do not have, within our charge as within your charge as the advisory board, we do also have a framework that we operate inside of.
Well, we've done it at other meetings and there was no objection by the folks who know the rules better than us, Becky. So that's my thoughts.
Yes, I am recommending that we also review the rules just to make sure.
Well, I did not hear a second.
I second that motion, and I like the word productive that Mary used.
Okay. And so vote on Mary's motion. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those against?
Michelle, are you going to vote?
I was on the fence. I'm not against it. I'm just either abstaining or for. I got distracted with my son because it was just getting late. So can I abstain? Because I didn't get to hear the entire thing.
Yes. So Charles, did we have a 3-0 and 1 vote on that then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I know, I didn't get made a comment before there was a motion, but it does feel odd. I've gone to other meetings, the planning commission meeting, city council meeting, etc. And there's not really an opportunity to follow up, and it would be nice if it fit within the rules that our board operates under, to be able to ask follow-up questions or things like that. Of course, I know we all have the opportunity to go off on our own and to, research the things that were discussed, but yeah. So, all right. So we have that vote. I think we can move to our next item, which is, are there any other items from the board? I guess that was one item that Ralph brought up. Yeah, I just wanted to make one comment, actually. So it's kind of related to the comments from the public today. And it's related to not being able to follow up. And for sometimes, a comment comes from the public, we would like to follow up on, and sometimes to ask questions, sometimes because things are just not accurate. And for example, with electric car batteries, it was stated that every electric car battery requires cobalt, and that is not the case. So there are fastest growing segment, the largest part of batteries now are lithium iron phosphate batteries. They have no cobalt in them. And so I think we have to be really careful about what, what kinds of things are, we take into account, that some of these statements can be just not true. And that's happened many times. And it feels very odd to be able to kind of sit here in silence and just let these statements kind of be made. And we don't do any follow-up either in asking questions or making statements that counter some of the things that are made by the public to be heard. So it'd be good to discuss that. Anyway, I just have to say that because that was a completely false statement. Lithium iron phosphate batteries, for example, have no cobalt in them.
I'd like to agree completely, Charles, with what you said, and that's one of the reasons I would like to be able, there was a statement made, if I understood it, about some dissenting science about climate change, whether it's a hoax or not. And I would like to have had access to that source to see what the point was that was being made. So I think that this can be, I think the direction that we're talking here could be helpful for the effectiveness of our board in making a contribution to the community.
Right.
Actually, Ralph, that source was sent to me. It's a group of climate scientists in Italy that have done an extensive meta-analysis, and the results are evocative and concerning. I will send it to Heather and that she may send it to the rest of the board.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Mary.
Okay. I guess we can move to our next item, which is items from council. Marcia's gone, so I think we don't have to, she's gone. Mary, your hand's still up. Are you? Okay. Information items and board correspondence, info item attachments. So we don't need to review those. Those are included in your packet. So we come to the end of the meeting. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn the September 21st, 22 Sustainability Board of Longmont meeting.
I'll second that motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you at our next meeting next month.
Good job, Charles. Thank everybody. It was
Yeah,
great. Thank you all.
Thank you all. See you
Thank you,
later.
Charles. That was seamless. Bye.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Okay, bye-bye.